Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We got Joe Hunk on the line, the Fallout 740, talking Auburn football. We're going historic here today. Would like to remind everyone to help us continue the channel. Please grab the Amazon link in the description section below. Do your regular Amazon shopping as you normally would. Doesn't cost you an extra penny. Just use the link right there. And we're also on Patreon, the voice of college football community. Please join us on patreon.com. I actually just released a video with screenshots of how to do that. All right, Joe. I don't want Auburn fans to take offense to this. Understand that I'm asking broadcasters, writers across this country, various programs involved, and this is a debate for many, depending on the program. Auburn, I'm going to bow and leave it open to the obvious choice, what I believe, but of course, we can mix it up in a number of ways. Greatest player of all time in Auburn history.
Because Bo's like the obvious answer, right?
Yeah.
Like Bo is the obvious answer to this. The thing about Bo, like if we're going to go this, because there's two obvious answers. There's the Bo Jackson answer because of what he did for Auburn, what he did for the Auburn program. People forget about that part because they just focus on his career. And then you also have Cam. Like those are the two that you're gonna narrow it down to. I think that if you go between the two, I'm always going to say Bo Jackson over Cam, mainly because of longevity. And also, Bo Jackson had a ripple-down effect for this team that Cam did not have. When Cam played in 2010, the game we were just talking about Michael Dyer's run, the field goal kick, he played one season, and we knew he was going to the NFL. Now, nobody in their right mind knew that he was going to the NFL and going to get drafted number 1 overall. But when he goes to the NFL, the very next season, Auburn was horrible. 2011, they were bad. 2012 was so bad that Gene Chizik totally changed the offense to go back to a traditional style of offense to try to get away from the hurry up, no huddle because Gus Malzahn was no longer there. He gets fired for it. If you look at Bo Jackson's imprint that he had on Auburn, he's playing both baseball and football. But at the same time, when he went to Auburn, that was in the period of time where Alabama was 100% dominating this state, but also dominating college football. Bear Bryant was towards the very end of his career. He was getting to that point where every single game was a milestone football game. Oh, he's at 310. He's at 311. You start talking about those. Bo Jackson choosing to go over Auburn instead of Alabama, what that did for them is that gave Auburn and Pat Dye this whole thing of we've got something on you. It was a local kid that everybody can kind of gravitate towards that started getting this program to a place where when they were running the offense that they were, the quarterback wasn't important. In 2019, the quarterback is huge. You don't have a good quarterback, you're screwed. But in that day and time when you're running the triple option and the wing and all this other stuff, your running backs are the key focus to this. And so Bo Jackson helping them get to the SEC championships. Then after he leaves, you had running backs behind him that started to continue that tradition of what Bo did. Now, were they ever going to be as great as Bo? No. Cadillac Williams is one of the greatest Auburn running backs in history, but for a different reason. He got hurt way too much, so he can't be in the conversation. I would probably put him at 3 if we're just talking about because of what his potential was, how great he was, what he meant for the team. But Bo Jackson's the obvious answer because he created something for Auburn where they took over the 80s when it came into SEC football. And then that led into the perfect season in 93, then you in 94, and all this other stuff that happened when they were on probation. It was all a ripple down from what Bo Jackson did.
I still marvel at that sequence of years from 2010 to 13, and I want to fall short of calling myself a college football historian, but I've got a pretty good lockdown on the history of college football, and I cannot, if anybody out there can come up with a series of seasons that went that way in terms of peak, valley, peak, I've never seen anything like that. 2010, you win a national championship. 2 years later, you're going 0-8, 3-9 overall. Then you're back to a national championship game. This has not happened anywhere else.
Oh, and what's so bad about it is it's a lot of obvious stuff, and it leads into why some Auburn fans are extremely excited about this football season because unlike your Alabamas, unlike your Clemsons, your Ohio States, those guys have great players directly behind the players that are currently starting. For Auburn, it's always like a 4-year process. It is you have a great season, then you have a horrible season because all of your great players graduate, and now you're back to playing freshmen and sophomores that didn't really get the reps, and so forth and so forth. If you look at the trend, I mean, we think about it, 2010, you look at that offensive line for Auburn, there were nothing but seniors. Like, you go and look at 2011, I feel horrible for Trotter. Like, the guy had no offensive line help. Him, Clint Mosley, all these guys were getting destroyed because they had no protection up front. That offensive line, if that offensive line comes back in 2011, the same ones that were there in 2010, it changes the whole course of history for Auburn, because people forget that when Russell Wilson was reopening his recruitment after he went and played Major League Baseball, it was down to Wisconsin and Auburn. The thing that Wisconsin had that Auburn did not was a healthy, senior-laden offensive line. Who wouldn't choose that over Auburn? Auburn was playing a bunch of sophomores and freshmen. If they have that senior offensive line or a veteran offensive line, you could have had Russell Wilson as your quarterback, and then you don't have the drop down. Gene Chizik may still be the head coach at Auburn if he pulls Russell Wilson in the transfer portal. So, we called it that, but we call it now. If he does all of those, that ripple effect that you talked about, 2011 may not have been that way. 2012, we may not have seen this huge change in offense. In 2013 would have just been another great year in the whole story of Gene Chizik's career. But instead, Russell Wilson goes to Wisconsin. They go to the Rose Bowl. Auburn gets destroyed, plays horribly in 11, plays so bad in 12 that Gene Chizik is fired after, Johnny Manziel comes in and just absolutely embarrasses them inside of Jordan-Hare Stadium. And then Gus Malzahn, after his 1 year at Arkansas State, comes back, and here we are.
We are taking the historical perspective on Auburn football. We got Joe Hunk on the line from the Fallout 740. It's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please join us on our Patreon account, the Voice of College Football Community, and also grab the Amazon link below to do your Amazon shopping to help us build the channel. All right. This is always a fun question for me because I have a guess on greatest player, of course, having a pretty good feel for the program, whatever the particular team we're talking about that day. But when you talk favorite player, that leaves it wide open because obviously the greatest players for many become the favorite players for obvious reasons. But the favorite player can be quirky. It could be just some weird reason why that particular player is attracted by that individual. So I'm going to leave it out there for your favorite. And you don't necessarily need to keep this to one guy. Any of these questions, you can go 3-5 deep, whatever you want to do. But favorite player all time for Auburn.
Glad you said I can have two because I kind of do. The first one is Ronnie Brown. And Ronnie Brown was a part of that Cadillac team. It was Cadillac. It was Ronnie. These guys were best friends. They drove to class together. They drove to practice together. They roomed together. And the thing about Ronnie is to me, he had more of an NFL body than what Cadillac did. And obviously we look back in history and we find out that was true. Cadillac wins a Rookie of the Year award for offensive player for Tampa. He tears his ACL. He was never the same. And now he's the running back coach for Auburn. Ronnie, on the other hand, he had more of an NFL body. He was more of a guy that could go between the tackles and could pick up some really tough yards. What people totally forget about the Ronnie Brown and Cadillac thing was the guy that was playing directly behind them. That was Brandon Jacobs. People totally forget about that part. Is in 2003 when this Auburn team was supposed to be winning the national championship, ended up going to the Music City Bowl. It was Cadillac. It was then Ronnie. And then it was Brandon Jacobs directly behind him. Brandon Jacobs says, these guys are coming back for their senior year. I'm not going to get playing time. Peace out. I'm done. He goes up to Illinois. I think it's Southern Illinois is where he goes to. Goes into the NFL, wins himself some rings. And I honestly, out of that backfield, he's the greatest running back to come out of that backfield. But with Ronnie, it was one of these deals, just like Yankees, Red Sox, just like Duke, North Carolina, just like Alabama, Auburn. You chose which one was your favorite. Do you like this one? Do you like that one? I'm a wrestling geek. Which member of the Shield is your favorite? Which DX member is your favorite? You go through all of those. Everybody loved Cadillac because he was flashy. I really was a Ronnie Brown guy. I had Ronnie Brown's jersey. That was what I was kind of in love with. My other one is more of an emotional one, and I mentioned him a little while ago, and that's Philip Lutzenkirchen. I really do believe that as far as a college athlete is concerned, as far as a college student athlete is concerned, he is an example that other athletes should follow. I mean, right now, I don't know if you can really see this too well, but you see the blue bracelet that I'm wearing right now. That's Philip Lutzenkirchen's bracelet. and it's got a saying on it that goes, and this all stems obviously from his passing away when he was killed in a car accident years ago because of drunk driving. And his family has turned this into a huge foundation to teach teenagers and kids about drinking and driving and the things that the ways that you should be more careful, because they wanted to make sure that their son's legacy of him being in a car accident, which he wasn't the driver, but he was in the back seat, and they want to turn this into something that can benefit so many kids. And his dad has turned this foundation into an event that there's golf tournaments, there's charity events, there's all this. They go to schools and they talk to people. And so Philip Lutzenkirchen was one of these players, and there's not many of them that you could ask an Alabama fan, and he says, I hate Auburn. I would love to have Philip Lutzenkirchen on my team. He was just a hard-nosed player that was a good kid, that was a good role model for kids, and his legacy that he has for Auburn is one that you could almost argue is a bigger legacy than what Cam Newton has, or a bigger legacy than what Pat Sullivan has. Now, obviously, Bo Jackson's in a thing of his own, but Philip Lutzenkirchen and the legacy that he leaves today because of his family, that to me, that's really big. And out of all these stories that we always hear about these kids, domestic violence issues, drinking and driving, getting arrested for marijuana possession, or any of these other ones, getting in fights at bars, Lutzenkirchen was a great role model. He made a mistake. He drank and drive. Well, he didn't drive. He drank. He didn't drive. He got in the back seat, but he didn't have his seatbelt on, gets in an accident, and he dies. And they've turned this into a legacy that can really benefit people, especially in the state of Alabama, when it comes to drinking and driving. That's why I like him.
Joe, I'm glad that you took the liberty to take it 2 or 3 deep on the favorites list. I enjoyed the breakdown of the 3-headed monster in the backfield that could have been with Cadillac, Brown, and Brandon Jacobs. As soon as you bring up Brandon Jacobs, I think, who in the world wanted to get in the way of this guy with those huge knees, the long legs, kicking up into a linebacker's chest, trying to tackle that guy? He was a monster. And we got to see that in the NFL with the Giants, as you mentioned. And then, we go completely off the field to something that's so far more important than football with the last story. And so I asked this question, as I mentioned, of dozens and dozens and dozens of different broadcasters and writers in regards to favorite player. And I usually get some interesting story about a childhood memory or something like this. And then you certainly deliver with that very meaningful legacy off the field right there. Joe Hunk, we encourage you to join him on the Fallout 740. I just believe it's Joe Hunk on Twitter, right? At Joe Hunk.
I hopped in early. So
you must have.
Hunk. So
it's beautiful
that everybody else on the station has their name. Like my co-host is rterry740. I just have Joe Hunk. Like, I got lucky when creating my Twitter handle.
Joe, we've got more to talk about. We've run out of time, though, so hope to have you on back very soon.
Absolutely, man.